With me now is Shadow Foreign Secretary Dame Priti Patel. Dame Priti, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. I've just interviewed Bridget Phillipson. Hi there. I've just interviewed Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, and asked her a series of questions about the Chinese spying scandal. She's then turning it back on the government, saying that this was something that started in 2023 under the Tories' watch, that the CPS, it was a shame that the CPS didn't want to continue the case. Nothing to see here.
Well, that's just an appalling line for her to be saying, and clearly she's just toting out whatever line the government has told her to say. The reality is, back in 2023, it was a Conservative government that started doing the evidential work behind the case. And of course, Camilla, as you know, the real problem we have right now is that the government politically intervened, this Labour government politically intervened to stop this trial from progressing. And we now have the Director of Public Prosecutions, Mr. Stephen Parkinson, basically saying that he asked the government and has been asking the government to provide a lot of the evidence for this case to go further, and it's not been forthcoming. So it's on this government's watch, and this government has too many questions now to answer about what it knew, its role, the level of political interference, the role of the National Security Advisor, the role of literally the Permanent Secretary to the Foreign Office, Keir Starmer's role, who has made decisions, and why are government ministers basically standing up in Parliament, going on television and saying it's nothing to do with them. It strikes me we've got a scrutiny shirking government, and this is completely irresponsible when it comes to the national security of our country.
You mentioned the National Security Advisor there, Jonathan Powell. He's the one who seemingly was reluctant to describe China as the enemy or a threat. Bridget Phillipson in this studio has said that China is a threat, which then begs the question of why that government didn't say so when it needed to in response to CPS requests. But let me put it this way to you, Dame Priti. If Jonathan Powell was acting on his own, then what does that say about the lack of scrutiny higher up? Ministers must have known what Jonathan Powell was doing in relation to this case, mustn't they?
Absolutely. And look, I was Home Secretary for just over 3 years, and the fact of the matter is ministers do sit at the National Security Council. Ministers do read a lot of the classified information. So I'm afraid this government is digging its hole even deeper right now by making these types of spurious remarks that Bridget Phillipson has done so this morning. So this is deadly serious. It really is, Camilla. And as you know, judging from the newspapers this morning, the United States of America, our closest ally and a partner we work with on national security, and Five Eyes, our national security apparatus, are now raising serious concerns about the British government's conduct when it comes to national security intelligence information. And I can tell you now, when your biggest ally is raising concerns, this puts us at risk now, because they will not be wanting to share intelligence information with this country if we are not going to act upon it, and if we're going to make political judgments in the way in which this government has done so. And I think also on top of this actually undermines our national security apparatus. You might have seen the reports this morning. There is this proposal for this new Chinese super embassy, which Labour ministers, Labour Secretary of States have all been crowing about and backing. The current Foreign Secretary, the ex-Home Secretary, and the previous Foreign Secretary signed letters saying they support this embassy. And yet, in doing so, we now know that our intelligence services, MI5, MI6, GCHQ, they were not even allowed to put evidence forward and information forward to that planning application as to why this was a real threat and why this embassy should not go ahead.
Having said all that, Dame Priti, the Conservatives have had a bit of a checkered history when it comes to China too. We had David Cameron and George Osborne accused of cozying up to China with the so-called golden era of relations. I vividly remember Xi Jinping being invited over for a bells and whistles state visit. The problem really is whether or not you think, as well as the government, China is the enemy and a threat. Tell me categorically what you think to this question, and I'll put it in a very straightforward way. First of all, is China, and should China be classed as an enemy?
Well, first of all, Camilla, let me tell you something now. I was Home Secretary for just over 3 years, and they were a threat, and they are an adversary, and they are an enemy. End of story. You know, it was Conservatives in government that brought forward the National Security Act, revised the Investigatory Powers Act, put forward everything to do with the National Cyber Crime Centre because of the level of threats that were coming from China. We changed the law. We brought in the National Security Investment Act of Parliament because we discovered all sorts of things about Chinese state-run organisations and entities acquiring and buying British companies. Some of these companies had a lot of data-sensitive information. We were the ones that acted upon this. So there should be no illusion here. It was the Conservatives, and I was part of that government, that took forward the Acts of Parliament, put forward the changes that were needed. I was the Home Secretary that looked at the revision around the Official Secrets Act, did a hell of a lot of work on national security. So I'm not going to take any lectures from anybody on this, at least of all a Labour government that, quite frankly, have been involved now in disrupting a judicial process, all because they're too busy bending the knee and kowtowing to China. You've also made a really important point, Camilla, which is about the economic relationship. We've always had an economic relationship with China. The British public buy goods from China. That's a fact of life. But when it comes to the national security of our country, the role of the government is to ensure that we undertake and bring forward the right kind of protective measures that keep our country safe. You've already heard me speak about our partner, the United States, our intelligence and security agencies. That apparatus keeps us safe.
But Dame Priti, we have to now agree, like many things actually, David Cameron and George Osborne were woefully naive when it came to their relationship with China back in the day. They got it wrong. It's all very well saying what the Tory government subsequently did.
That was a different time, Camilla.
I know, but now we're in a situation where the Chinese... But we're in a situation where after 14 years of Tory rule, the Chinese own a huge amount of our key national infrastructure. They own water boards, they own electricity boards, they owned British Steel and ran it into the ground. This did all happen under the Conservatives' watch because we had this strange era where Cameron and Osborne extremely naively thought there was nothing particularly wrong with this Chinese partner that happens to be communists.
Well, let me just say something to you. I agree with you completely. I mean, it's a communist-led state. They're at the heart of the axis of authoritarianism. They're doing absolutely terrible things around the world. Their record on human rights is appalling. We understand that. We know that. We actually acted on that in government. You know, I'm not going to comment about previous eras, which, by the way, during that period you're referring to, countries around the world in the West had a totally different relationship with China. They have become a real axis of authoritarianism, a real adversary. We've seen that just with this war with Ukraine as well. The fact that the Chinese are supplying weaponry and people to basically fight Western values and Western civilization and institutions. The world has moved on since then. And obviously China has become an even more severe threat. We responded, we acted, and we are still acting upon this. So in light of everything that you've just said and I've just said, it is absolutely reprehensible that we have a Labour government that just thinks they can wash their hands, not stand up to scrutiny, crash basically a serious spy case where people, British citizens, were spying on behalf of the Chinese state, an adversary and an enemy of our country. That is not acceptable. And the people that need to be scrutinised on this are this Labour government, and I'm going to say it, the Prime Minister, who is constantly shirking scrutiny.
One final question, because we're running out of time. When it comes to peace in the Middle East, which we're hopeful will last and be lasting peace following the ceasefire release of the hostages, Nobel has been criticised for snubbing President Trump when it comes to giving him the Peace Prize. Should the US president be given that Peace Prize, Priti Patel?
Well, I absolutely think so, on the basis that he's done a great deal to use the office of the President of the United States to convene, to bring people together and to bring warring parties together. Now, that is absolutely right. It's commendable. But let me just say this, Camilla. We are still at a very fragile state right now. We're only at the early phases. I think tomorrow will be a very difficult day for everyone to view hostages being released, also prisoners being released as well. We don't even know what the next phase phases are going to be in terms of peace and stability, security for Gaza, Hamas being completely disarmed. They are a terrorist organisation that I prescribed as Home Secretary. They are the cause of this conflict and the terrible atrocities that we've seen, and the hostages being kidnapped and kept in captivity for over 700 days. We are at an early stage. This is very fragile and we need everyone to work together.
All right.